Hey, it's Saturday, February 15, and this is the 5-Minute Podcast Review. 2 podcasts this episode. Both podcasts have crept onto my playlist in recent months, though the first podcast has been around a few years. It's called the Blindboy Podcast. Now, I know mentioning the Blindboy Podcast will create an instant and stark split out there between the cult-like fans of Blindboy and everyone else who'll be thinking, who or what is Blindboy? So, for the benefit of the latter group, Blindboy is mid-30ish Irishman and one half of the satirical duo The Rubber Bandits. They are huge in Ireland and also pretty big across the UK and growing rapidly in the US as well. They first hit the radar in the mid to late 2000s doing prank calls for radio stations, which evolved into TV and stage comedy sketches and viral YouTube videos. But by far the most distinctive feature of Blindboy, and in fact the Rubber Bandits duo, is the wearing of plastic shopping bags tightly over their heads, like a mask, with holes cut for eyes, nose and mouth. So the real appearance of the duo is not well known. They're not widely recognised in public. Just Google Blindboy to see what I'm talking about. It's easier than trying to explain putting a shopping bag over your head. Okay, so fast forwarding to the podcast, Blindboy initially started his podcast back in late 2017, apparently intending to do only a few episodes as a vehicle to promote his new book. But Blindboy quickly realised the essential magic of podcasting, the direct, unfiltered, uncensored connection between speaker and listener. And in Blindboy's case, this has grown to be hundreds of thousands of listeners. So he kept producing episodes pretty much weekly for the last 2.5 years, often just Blindboy talking into the mic, though occasionally there are interviews featuring an eclectic range of people. And eclectic is the operative word. It's hard to pin down the overall theme of the Blindboy podcast. Episode subjects can vary wildly. Things can go from takes on religion, talking about Ireland and politics, to social media, and even getting static electric shocks off cans on the supermarket shelf. So I reckon at this point it's probably a good idea to play you a sample of the Blindboy podcast. But for the reasons I just explained, it's hard to pin down anything that's a good blanket representation. So I'm just going to do a bit of a needle drop so you can at least hear what the Blindboy podcast sounds like. Here we go.
Cognitive behavioural therapy in a nutshell is how you feel is influenced by how you think, your cognition. Okay? So if you experience anxious emotions, angry emotions, depressive emotions, right? If you feel this way, then chances are your cognitive thoughts, your beliefs about yourself, other people or the world are also negative. So CBT, not to be confused with cock and ball torture, which is something that can happen, man. Don't ever use CBT as a hashtag on Twitter. You'll get away with it on Facebook, you'll get away with it on Instagram, but if you use CBT as a hashtag on Twitter, because Twitter doesn't have any rules against pornography, the CBT hashtag, it's half like really helpful stuff about mental health, and the other half is like lads having their cocks stepped on with stiletto heels, or a very amusing piece of equipment called a cock and ball torture parachute, which is like a fucking strange leather thing with chains on it, and lads hang it off their balls and cock and get someone to pull it because they enjoy intense pain in their genitals. It's a fetish. So let's not confuse CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, with cock and ball torture.
Right, well, definitely some good advice there. But like I said before the clip, the Blindboy podcast is eclectic. It's not a podcast about psychology, though themes around this, including especially anxiety, are often touched on. But I could have just as likely dropped the needle on Blindboy reciting Irish poetry or having a rant against social media while at the same time admitting he relies on it to make his living, or, as I heard in a recent episode, standing outside painting a word picture of a messed up San Francisco street scene while he was there on a visit. It's one of those podcasts where you really do need to go and download a few different episodes to allow yourself to mentally triangulate what it's all about. So anyhow, the Blindboy Podcast is different, and you'll soon work out if it's for you or not. If I've got you intrigued, there should be a link to the podcast on your screen, or just search for the Blindboy Podcast. Okay, so on to another podcast I've been listening to lately. It's a newish tech podcast called Waveform. So Waveform's been running since August last year and bills itself as a podcast for gadget lovers and tech heads, which sort of describes me. But more significantly, Waveform marks the entry into podcasting for Marques Brownlee. He's better known to many as MKBHD and has been producing tech-focused YouTube videos since 2009 when he was still in high school. These days, his YouTube channel is one of, if not the most subscribed to tech-based YouTube channels with over 10 million subscribers, and he's often pumping out 3 new videos a week. While most of the videos are tech reviews, including a lot of smartphone reviews, Marques's pulling power as a tech YouTuber has also scored him interview guests of the caliber of Elon Musk and Bill Gates. The production quality of his YouTube videos is super high and is obviously generating quite a few dollars. Marques tells the audience in one video that he has a Tesla Cybertruck on order. So, with all this success as a YouTube producer, why would Marques bother with the extra effort of a podcast? It's an interesting question. In fact, he's not alone. Many successful and probably a whole lot of not-so-successful YouTubers are also starting podcasts. In Marques's case, he comes straight into podcasting with sponsors aboard, so at a purely financial level, it's leveraging an extra stream of income, I guess, but the podcast format opens up a new audience and listening opportunities. You can't really watch a YouTube video when you're driving the car or walking the dog or shopping for groceries. Also, and I think most interestingly, it plays to what I believe is the real magic of podcasts. No other media can compete when it comes to the connection you can make with your audience. On video, on YouTube, Marques is playing to an audience of 10 million. On the podcast, it feels like he's playing to an audience of 1, you, the listener, or me, the listener. And it leads to a relaxed, less presenter, more intimate kind of connection. Marques does have a co-host for the podcast, Andrew Maganelli, so there's a lot of unscripted banter that you don't so much get on the YouTube productions. And while most podcast episodes focus on the same kinds of tech reviews as the YouTube videos, ranging from reviewing Tesla electric cars to the new AirPod Pro earbuds, they also broaden out into chats about things like the worst tech event the guy's ever attended, recommendations on underrated YouTube channels, and a lot of the behind-the-scenes sort of stuff, like a recent episode taking a deep dive into the workflow for producing the videos on the MKBHD YouTube channel. That's Marques's YouTube channel. Marques also made the comment that the podcast is a great vehicle to capture the ordinary day-to-day tech banter that goes on in their office, talking about the overnight news or some latest development in tech. As he put it, the stuff that's too long for a tweet, but not long enough for a video. By the way, MKBHD is the official moniker the host Marques goes by and stands for Marques Keith Brownlee High Definition. Apparently it was something he came up with at the start of his YouTube days back in 2009 when high definition video was still something to distinguish yourself by. Another feature of the Waveform podcast is a regular listener Q&A for any questions on tech or on the making of the YouTube videos. I think a lot of us will relate to this question and answer from a recent episode.
Isaac asks, what's your least favorite thing about editing?
Hearing my own voice.
Really?
Yeah. And you would think this was something after about 10 years that you would get used to. This is year 11. You don't.
I don't like hearing that since I edit all the podcast stuff now, and it's been so new to me, like hearing my own voice. But
you will never get used to hearing a recording of your own voice.
Yep. The only consolation about not liking the sound of your recorded voice is knowing that almost nobody likes the sound of their recorded voice. Well, looks like once again I've gone well over my 5 minutes, so I'll wrap the episode with a reminder we looked at the Blindboy podcast and then, just now, Waveform. Links to both should be on your screen, and I hope you find one or both of these podcasts interesting enough to check out. See you in the next episode. Thanks for listening.